Good evening. My name's Chuck Iovan. Thank you. Good evening. My name's Chuck Iovan. I'll be presiding over this evening's joint...
Recording in progress.
You have that? Good evening. My name's Chuck Iovan, and I will be presiding over this evening's joint meeting between the City Council Ordinance Committee and the Malden Planning Board, December 5th, 2023. The first order of business is for those in attendance under the provisions of the open meeting law. Attendees are informed that this meeting is being recorded by Urban Media Arts, formerly MATV. I have not been notified that any other video or audio recording of this meeting will occur. The first thing we'll do is we will first take a roll call of the Planning Board and then a roll call of the City Council Ordinance Committee. Starting with Risa Gray.
Risa Gray, Planning Board.
Thodaj Gabrasillase, Planning Board.
Diane Shuha, Planning Board.
Ken Antonucci, Planning Board.
Chuck Iovan, Planning Board.
Eric McCush, Planning Board.
Pat Hayes, Planning Board.
Eric Henry, Planning Board.
Ronnie Raj Verma, Planning Board.
And I will pass it over to Councilor Crowe.
Councilor Crowe, City Council Ordinance Committee.
Councilor Linehan, City Council Ordinance Committee.
Councilor Winslow, City Council Ordinance Committee.
Councilor Sika, City Council Ordinance Committee.
Thank you very much. The next thing we will do, I will ask the Planning Board clerk to read the public notice.
The Malden Planning Board and the Malden City Council Ordinance Committee will jointly hold a public hearing in the Herbert L. Jackson Council Chamber, Malden City Hall, 215 Pleasant Street, Malden, Mass. At 7 p.m. on Tuesday, December 5th, 2023, in accordance with Title 12, Chapter 32, Section 050 of the Code of the City of Malden, regarding the petition of zoning amendments as proposed in City Council Paper Number 418/2023 to further amend Title 12 of the Code of the City of Malden as follows. To amend Sections 12.080.10, Establishment of Districts, and 12.08.020, MCC Zoning Map. 1. To establish an MBTA Communities Multi-Family Overlay Zoning District with subdistricts that include the following parcels. 11 Canal Street, 35 Canal Street, Center Street, 63-65 Center Street, 124 Center Street, 11 Charles Street, 17 Charles, Commercial Street, 102 Commercial, 40-66 Exchange Street, 70-76 Exchange Street, 100-150 Exchange Street, 10 Florence Street, 39 Florence Street, 99 Florence Street, 7 Jackson Street, Main Street, 32 Pearl Street, 89 Pearl Street, 100 Pearl Street, 83 Pleasant Street, 95-105 Pleasant Street, 110-112 Pleasant Street, Ramsdale Road, 10-20 Summer Street, 7 Washington Street, 17-19 Washington Street, 36 Dartmouth Street, 504-514 Main Street, 160 Pleasant Street, 195 Pleasant Street, 5 Island Hill Avenue, Main Street, 224-248 Main Street, 260 Main Street, 550 Main Street, 556 Main Street, 1038 Main Street, 1100 Main Street, 1128 Main Street, 30-32 Maple Street, 33 Maple Street, 36 Maple Street, Ramsdale Road, Summer Street, 74-80B Summer Street, 82 Summer Street, 89 Summer Street, 101-109 Summer Street, 117 Summer Street, 120 Summer Street, 134 Summer Street, 474-488 Broadway, 10 Overlook Ridge Drive, 51 Overlook Ridge Drive, 181 Kennedy Drive, 244 Kennedy Drive, 8 Quarry Lane, 12 Quarry Lane, 15 Quarry Lane, 4 Stone Lane. 2, to establish a mandatory mixed-use overlay zoning district that includes the following parcels: 12 Bickford Road, 167-169 Center Street, 185 Center Street, 0 Charles Street, 22 Charles Street, 28-30 Charles Street, 36 Charles Street, 31 Commercial Street, 51 Commercial Street, 65 Commercial Street, 77 Commercial Street, 89 Commercial Street, 99-109 Commercial Street, 43 Dartmouth Street, 4-6 Evelyn Place, 2 Florence Street, 0 Main Street, 290-3 to 12 Main Street, 480 Main Street, 492-500 Main Street, 521-539 Main Street, 69 Middlesex Street, Pleasant Street, 41-49 Pleasant Street, 51-61 Pleasant Street, 126-150 Pleasant Street, 137-147 Pleasant Street, 157 Pleasant Street, 169-185 Pleasant Street, 190, 205, 215 Pleasant Street, 321 Pleasant Street, 332 Pleasant Street, 50-52 Summer Street, 54-72 Summer Street. B, to amend section 1...
Excuse me, Diane, could I, if I could just, before you move on to the next section, the parcels, I meant to correct this, the parcels that didn't have an address, could you read the parcel ID so we're clear? So I highlighted them, or you can just go back through. So Center Street, commercial, if you could read the parcel ID, just so it'll be clear for the record which parcel.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Center Street, parcel number 053235502. Commercial Street, 053253501B. Main Street, 050259905. Main Street, 062308810. Main Street, 062308811. Ramsdale Road, 049279932. Summer Street, 020120012. And I missed one on Ramsdale Road with 049279931. 0 Charles Street was 062239913. 0 Main Street was 062239914. Pleasant Street, 031133309. And I think I got them all.
Thank you, Diane.
I still have to finish, there's a couple more
okay.
things. B is to amend section 12.12 MCC use regulations, to establish use regulations, dimensional requirements, parking requirements, development standards, site plan review regulations, and affordability requirements for MBTA Communities Zoning Overlays, namely an MBTA Communities Multi-Family Overlay Zoning District and a mandatory mixed-use overlay zoning district. C, to amend section 12.32.060.b MCC definition zoning to add a definition for the following: as of right or by right, mixed-use development and multifamily housing. Now I'm done.
Thank you, Diane. Before I introduce or ask the sponsors to introduce the paper, I would like to ask the Planning Board and the City Council Ordinance Committee if we could hold discussion and questions until after the public hearings in order to allow those that came out an opportunity to speak, and so that we don't take up too much time with questions and discussions at the without letting everyone in the public speak first. Okay. Next thing, I will pass it over to Councilor Crowe and Councilor Spatafor and Councilor Winslow.
I think thank you. I think we'll turn it over to Councilor Winslow, who was on the committee that actually did the work.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, this paper is proposed. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts passed a state law requiring communities within that are served by the MBTA to develop new housing requirements, and to, and that law required some guidelines to be established related to actually having areas in each community served by transit to have areas where near transit that will be by right housing. So the city, over the past year has been going through that process. We've had several hearings and done a community survey. The result of that input and the work of the staff, and I think the presentation is the proposal you've seen tonight. As you can see, most of the comments from the survey really talked about trying to focus any additional housing in the Oak Grove and downtown area. We also are taking advantage of areas in Malden like the Overlook Ridge area that have already had multi-use housing. So this is a process we've been going through a lot, and this has been a lot of back and forth. We had basically bi-weekly meetings discussing this that were available for the public to see. So there's been a lot of discussions and a lot of work to make sure we're meeting the guidance. So this proposal isn't intending to meet both the state law and the guidance that the state has put out, and in a way that best reflects the input from the citizens of Malden. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. I'll pass it over to Michelle for an overview of the law and the process.
Okay, thank you. Michelle Romero, City Planner. So as Council Winslow said, the new law does require Malden to have zoning that allows multifamily housing by right. The law set guidelines through the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, which was formerly known as the Department of Housing and Community Development. So guidelines were issued August 10th, 2022, revised October 21st, 2022, and most recently August 17th, 2023. So those guidelines set the unit capacity for Malden as 6,930 multifamily housing units. That number is 25% of Malden's total housing units, according to Census 2020. So we have 27,721 units, housing units, so that's how our state capacity was set. Malden is considered a rapid transit community. We're one of 12 of the original communities that had a MBTA rapid transit station within its boundaries. So that is how we are at the 25% requirement. The state also, the guidelines of the state also set the district size, and that is based on developable land area within half mile of a transit station. I want to note that the state law does not require affordable housing. It does allow a maximum affordability requirement of 10%. To include a higher requirement, such as Malden's inclusionary zoning, 15%, requires completion and submission of an economic feasibility analysis. The city has worked with its consultants to prepare that analysis. One of the consultants is here in person tonight, Jeff Levine, if there are any questions regarding that analysis, and the other consultant, Carl Seidman, is online via Zoom. So they're here to answer any questions if you have any about that process. Again, they did the assessment or the analysis so that we could incorporate our 15% IZ requirement into this new zoning. The counselor mentioned the internal working group, also the survey. I won't go back through those details. You do have information in your packages about that. I do, however, want to also note the state deadline for our compliance is December 31st, 2023. So by that date, the city would have to enact zoning that complies with this new state law, Mass General Laws, Chapter 48, Section 3A. The city does have interim compliance. We received that on March 31st, 2023. It expires December 31st, 2023. We will have to have filed electronically the district compliance application no later than December 31st, 2023. So that's a form we'll file electronically with the enacted ordinance. On that note, I want to introduce the consultants that we worked with who were originally from Stantec. They are now in their own consulting group. They are here tonight to give you a brief overview of the current zoning scenario, which is the map that is up on the screen. You also all have a copy of that in your package. It's called the MCMOD and MMUD boundary map. MCMOD stands for MBTA Community Multi-Family Housing Overlay District, and the MMUD stands for Mandatory Mixed Use District. So the consultants are here, Nels Nelson and Sarah Brent McCoy. They will take us through the current scenario in terms of the map, and then they will also give a brief presentation on the impacts to city services and revenue that we looked at during the course of developing this zoning. And while they're approaching, I do want to just note for the record too, the clerk did not read all the parcel IDs, but all the addresses that were read correspond to the parcel IDs with GIS. So the public is available, would be able to search by address. On the ones that she added the parcel ID, there are multiple, for example, main streets. So that's why we added the parcel ID, but it's all incorporated into the record, and that was the notice that was posted, even though it wasn't read in its entirety out loud. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And if I could ask when the consultants first speak, please give your name and address for the record and sign the clipboard when you get a moment. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nels Nelson. I'm a principal at Community Scale. My address is Somerville, and Sarah Brent's going to be giving the bulk of the presentation, but you might hear from me with answering some of the questions.
My name is Sarah Brent McCoy. Do I need to crouch? Okay.
Put that microphone up onto.
My name is Sarah Brent McCoy. I'm an associate with Community Scale, and I am in Cambridge. Tonight, I'm just going to walk you through what we're looking at on the screen, the map and the table of capacity, existing units, and maximum potential growth. We, after many drafts, arrived at doing up this MCMOD, the MBTA Communities Multi-Family Overlay District, into 4 sub-districts reflective of their relative context, the densities and standards of their of the areas in which they've been placed. We have Malden Center, which is shown in yellow. That is matching the density of buildings like this, and sort of the it's informed by the dimensional standards of the Central Business District. The darkest pink is Malden Center High Rise. It's at a higher number of maximum floors, and you can see it's just those handful of parcels in the darker pink that's not showing up very well on the screen, but hopefully is clearer in the packets. Additionally, we have what is now called TOD Medium Density Oak Grove as another sub-district. Originally was just captured by the area right around Oak Grove, that square towards the top. But through iterations and survey responses and other input, we applied those similar dimensional standards to parcels along Summer Street, some along Main Street. So those are shown in orange as well. The green is our final sub-district in the overlay, and that captures some of the portions of Granada Highlands, and Oak Grove, and Overlook Ridge. The priority with this map was to respond to the survey, respond to input from our working group, respond to input from the various city council and public hearing meetings that we've attended. And as you can see, the majority of the capacity is around the stations. And the highest unit capacity and max potential growth are in the are around the stations as well, in the areas where in the yellow, pink, and orange. I'll walk you through the table now. We have the 4 sub-districts and the MMU district. I haven't talked about the MMU district. That's the lighter pink. That is in response to an update that we got from Housing and Livable Communities in August, which allows for us to account for 25% of the total capacity of that 6,930 number in a district that requires a first floor of non-residential use. So we've really tried to, seeing as that sort of development is important to Malden, particularly in Malden Center, we've really maxed out what the amount of capacity that we can put there. What else? All right, so looking to the table, in that first column we have the unit capacity. That's based on the output from the capacity calculator provided by the state. It is a policy tool. It's not an exact number. That would require more of a sort of parcel by parcel determination. But for the purposes of complying, that's the estimate of unit capacity. What could be built there if nothing were there. The existing units is the second column. That includes what's permitted. So for example, at 11 Charles Street, currently there's nothing there, but the units that have been permitted there have been accounted for. And then the final column, maximum potential growth, is essentially the total, it's the sum of, it's parcel by parcel, the sum of the difference between the unit capacity and the existing units. So it's not going to be equal to that number. It's not going to be, for Malden Center, it's not going to be equal to 1996 minus 1048, but rather it's the sum of the parcel by parcel differences where that difference is positive. I'll leave it there for now, and we're available for questions unless there's anything that Nels wants to speak to. Yes. Yeah. I have that available. Sure, so we worked with the city to identify impacts of concern and provided a longer report, but I will walk through the highlights tonight, and again, we're available to clarify anything. Looking at that number, 2,265 total max potential growth units. Again, that's an estimate, but that is the basis for our impact analysis. With that estimate, we find that there is potential for as many as 337 affordable housing units to be created under this zoning. That's in keeping with the 15%. It's slightly lower than 15% just because it's only triggered when there are 8+ units, and some of the developments made possible under this zoning are smaller than that. So that's in keeping with Malden's inclusionary zoning, as Michelle spoke to. It was important. It was expressed that it was important to preserve existing land uses, particularly in the neighborhoods, the 1 and 2 family homes. No 1 or 2 family homes have been included in this final scenario and would not be converted under this zoning. Open space, upwards of 566,000 square feet of open space may be created through the minimum requirement of 250 square feet per unit in all subdistricts and in the MMU district. For traffic, we looked at vehicle miles traveled per capita and found that if we are to assume that VMT per capita stays similar to what it is for the census tract around Malden Center and Oak Grove, you could see an increase of up to 5% of overall VMT. For fire, we looked at we received an estimate of 1.68 staffing standard per 1,000 residents. We received that estimate from the fire chief and extrapolated to suggest that 8.5 additional fire staff might be needed to cover the max potential growth. And again, all of these numbers are a max. It's a total build out of this subdistrict and MMU district. Police, similarly, they're staffed at a similar per 1,000 resident rate. Could need as many as 8.7, upwards of 8 additional police staff. School enrollment, we looked at the relationship, the historic relationship since 2007 between permitted units and changes in enrollment in Malden Public Schools and charter schools, and estimate that somewhere around 46 additional students could seek enrollment in Malden schools based on that precedent. Finally, annual property tax revenue, upwards of $8 million, could be generated based on assumptions of what, based on assumptions of the value of added properties. And this is an input to understand what Malden's required contribution to school funding might be under Chapter 70. Municipal contribution for school funding is based on total property value and total income in the city of Malden, and we find using those a very rough estimate of Malden's potential additional contribution to minimum contribution under Chapter 70 to schools, increasing potentially by $5.5 million. That's the end of the list of the impacts that we have for you today, but we're available to clarify anything. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So are you guys finished with your presentation?
Yes.
Thank you. So Michelle, that takes us to likelihood of change.
Yes. Briefly, we do want to note that we have been talking about this potential growth number, which is based on the state compliance model. So when we ran the proposed new zoning, the requirements, the lot sizes, et cetera, through the state's model, that is how we come up with that estimated maximum potential growth. that might be allowed under the new zoning. So that's the 2,265 units. However, the potential growth is expected to be less than the 2,265 units, given market conditions and regional economic issues that will affect the likelihood of development or redevelopment or change of parcels. So the city's consultants developed a simplified residual land use analysis model, and running the numbers through that model, the estimated potential growth is, running the properties through, the estimated potential growth is 1,143 units. So I did want to mention that as well. Again, potential growth is expected to be lower based on the likelihood of change.
Okay, thank you very much. Michelle, do you or Councilor Crowe, do you have anything else that you'd like to present as part of the paper and presenting it? No, you all set? And you're all set, Michelle?
I did want to note that Council Spatafora has joined via Zoom, and I was going to ask if you wanted me to promote him to panelist. I didn't know if he wanted to add anything. He was on the internal
Yes,
working
please.
group. So Council Spatafora, we're promoting you to panelist so that you will have the opportunity to speak with your committee. And he is rejoining as a panelist.
Okay.
So I'm asking Council Spatafora to unmute. So I'm not sure what's going on.
Is he saying he?
Oops, that is me. So, so he's not saying anything. So, Council Spatafora, I don't know if you can hear us. We're asking you to unmute. I'm not sure if you have that option to unmute. Well,
Okay, then we'll presume
Yeah.
he doesn't
Okay.
want to speak at the moment.
okay.
What's
Did
that?
he express that to you, Ed? He did?
Now,
But, there's the Trump PPN relationship in those numbers.
okay, so we could hear him for a minute. That was him speaking, because it lit up green, so maybe he's on another call. I don't know. Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right, so he's on. If he wants to speak later, he's a panelist, so, okay.
Okay, very good. But if you don't have anything else, Michelle, and the sponsors don't have anything else, at this time would like to entertain anyone that would like to speak in favor of this council paper 418. Anyone that would like to speak in favor? Again, I ask that before you start speaking, you give your name and address for the record, and also sign the clipboard. Thank you.
Good evening, members of the Planning Board and representatives of the Ordinance Committee of the City Council. My name is Deborah Burke. I'm the Director of the Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development. This evening, I'm here on behalf of Mayor Gary Christensen to voice support for the zoning package that's before you this evening. I appeared before the City Council at its meeting on November 14th, 2023, and at that night read into the record a fairly lengthy letter of support from the mayor. Just for the record of this public hearing tonight, I won't read the entire document, but I do want to make sure that certain elements of that letter are on the record for this joint public hearing. So if you bear with me. In writing the letter supporting the enactment of this zoning package, Mayor Christensen wrote in part, these are the highlights of the plan, and these are important in part of your deliberations. The plan focuses most potential growth opportunities in downtown Malden in immediate proximity to the Malden Center MBTA station. The plan also steers direct impacts out of the neighborhoods, which will alleviate known issues of concern, such as overcrowding, overuse, and parking. The plan minimizes overall impacts to the city by limiting the size and location of districts, which is likely to lessen traffic congestion. The plan incentivizes redevelopment of select underutilized parcels in the downtown, for example, the National Grid site on Canal and Charles Street. It includes a mandatory mixed-use district in downtown Malden, which helps us achieve the following goals. It allows the city to maintain its commercial tax base, which has been, front and center of several of the conversations in front of the City Council. It supports existing established businesses. It preserves existing mixed-use site. An example is the development that we sit in this evening where City Hall occupies with apartments and other commercial enterprises. It includes a Malden Center high-rise subdistrict in downtown to ensure the longevity of core housing sites, such as the Heritage Apartments at 195 Pleasant Street. And it seeks state approval to increase the affordability requirements to mirror Malden's inclusionary zoning that Michelle referenced in her report to the Planning Board. Front and center in the mayor's correspondence is the fact that he indicates that missing this deadline of December 31st is going to mean that the city of Malden is going to be ineligible for several state grant funding opportunities. We just most recently received a $3 million award from the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program administered by the state for the Malden River Works project. We would not be eligible to apply for that grant in 2024 if this zoning is not in place. We also received a $300,000 grant from the state for the Malden River Works project recently through its Housing Choice Program, another program that we would be barred from participating in 2024. Maybe a month ago, we just got announced that we won $4 million in state funding through what is called the MassWorks program, which funds infrastructure improvements. And that will help make corridor improvements along the Salem Street and Overlook Ridge Drive in order to facilitate the redevelopment of Overlook Ridge to include several hundred units of affordable housing, both market rate, both for rental and also for home ownership opportunities. That project will, if all the permitting goes through, include up to 100 units of affordable home ownership opportunities at that site, as well as a first ever project in the community that would be restricted to 55 years and older of its tenants. We also, as most of you here know, received $9 million in MassWorks funding to build this city hall that you sit in here today, as well as move the police station that was down at this end of the square over to Eastern Avenue. In closing, in the mayor's letter, he asked that folks consider their favorable support of this zoning. It allows us to be eligible to continue to apply for state funding. It puts us in compliance with the law, but then it gives us all an opportunity to look at a more comprehensive master plan, which has been endorsed and supported by the majority of the members, if not all, of the city councilors. And there were headlines to that effect in the Malden Advocate recently. That will be probably a year-long process, but it's one that's long overdue, given that the city's last master plan was in 2010. That's all I have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. Is there anyone else that would like to speak in favor of this council paper?
Hello, I'm Xenia Dragon. I'm a graduate student and I live over on Central Ave. I haven't been to a hearing before, but I got a letter in the mail about this one. And after reviewing the proposed changes, I want to speak in favor of the proposed changes overall, because I think that generally the state law that Massachusetts passed mandating the MBTA communities is there to address a specific need where there is a state housing crisis. And I think overall the plan seems like a good way to address that issue, as well as improve quality of life for people that would be inhabiting these mixed use and multifamily units. As such, I believe it's a good idea to go forward with this, but I do have some particular issues with some of the provisions of the proposed additions. Particularly, there's a escape hatch for the affordable housing units that allows a developer to pay $300,000 per required affordable housing unit that they do not develop. And I think this creates an unfortunate incentive where developers might pay that fee and then offload the cost onto renters of those units, which would contradict the intention, as I would assume, of having the percentage of affordable housing units in the first place. So I don't know what the exact impacts of this would be, but I think that that issue should definitely be addressed. Additionally, I had some concerns about the exact mechanisms used to derive the number of expected development units, which is under slightly over 50% of the maximum new units that are in the numbers in these documents. That seems a little concerning to me. I think in general, being in favor of such development, I would like to see personally, as much of the maximum being utilized as possible. And so I don't know what economic conditions would lead to that analysis, but addressing some of those in order to encourage more development under the new changes would also be a good idea, in my opinion. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. But before you go, could you tell us what number Central Avenue that you live at? And make sure you sign the clipboard.
Yes, I live at 31 Central Avenue.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to speak in favor? Michelle, do you have anything to read in favor?
No.
Is there anyone on Zoom that would like to speak in favor?
I'm not seeing anybody. I did receive the message that Council Spatafora was kicked off and cannot log back in. I don't know what's going on. It is live still, but nobody is raising their hand to speak. So
Okay.
I'll say no.
Last time I will ask, anyone in favor? Seeing and hearing none, declare that part of the hearing closed. Is there anyone that would like to speak in opposition to this council paper? Anyone in opposition? Michelle, do you have anything to read in opposition?
No.
And we don't see anyone on Zoom, or
I do
do
not see anybody. Let me just refresh it to make sure here. No, nobody's raising their hand, so.
Very good. Last call, anyone to speak in opposition? Seeing and hearing none, declare that part of the hearing closed. Michelle, can you take us through your staff report and recommendation, please?
Yes, I'm reading from the planning report and recommendation dated December 5th, 2023. I will not read everything verbatim into the record. It is incorporated herein by reference into the record. So we've heard about the proposal. This is City Council Paper 418, 2023. You do have a copy of the full text of the amendments in your package. That was also sent to you in advance for review. The mayor's memo, Mayor Christensen's memo to the City Council dated November 9th, 2023, that introduced the zoning amendment proposal. You also have a copy of that. That is the one that Ms. Burke was referring to. You have a copy of that in your package. So we talked about the new state law, the guidelines, Malden's capacity. I've given you here a summary of the proposed amendments. As I said, you do have a copy of the full text, so I'm going to give you some of the highlights. We've already heard that there'll be 2 new overlay zoning districts proposed to be established. One is the MBTA Communities Multi-Family Overlay Zoning District, that's known as MCMOD, with the 4 sub-districts that we heard about: Malden Center High Rise, Medium Density, and then Oak Grove, which, as the consultant stated, includes parcels outside the Oak Grove station area. These sub-districts are differentiated by dimensional and parking requirements, which we'll get into in a minute. The second overlay district proposed to be established to comply with this law is the mandatory mixed-use overlay zoning district. That allows a maximum of 25% of our total unit capacity, which is 1732 units, to be in mandatory mixed-use developments. We'll talk a bit in a minute what that means and how that's defined. Finally, I do want to call your attention again to the map. The City of Malden MBTA Communities Zoning Overlay Zoning Districts dated 11/9/23, MCMOD-MMUD boundary map. You have a copy of that map, which is the original map that was filed with the paper. The map that's on the screen is a version of that, so everything is identical, except it also includes the chart on the left that gives you the breakdown of unit capacity, potential growth, et cetera. So the map itself is the same. I just want to make sure. You also have a copy of what is being projected, but all the boundaries are the same. What's different is just that text block. In terms of use regulations, in the MCMOD subdistricts, so those are the 4 subdistricts, multifamily dwellings are allowed by right. In the MMUD, which is the mandatory mixed-use zoning district, multifamily dwellings are allowed by right. In the MCMOD subdistricts, mixed-use development may be allowed. However, only those non-residential uses allowed in the underlying zoning district are allowed. This is an overlay zoning district, so the underlying zoning will be in effect unless it's changed by this zoning. A developer could develop under current zoning or under the new proposed zoning. Just want to be clear about that. This is not permanently or definitively changing the zoning. It's adding another option for the zoning of to the zoning of those properties. Mixed-use development is required in the mandatory mixed-use zoning district. It is defined to be non-residential use of the ground floor for the following uses: daycare, general offices, recreation for gainful business, restaurant, other or non-fast food, retail sales with less than 5,000 square feet, retail services, convenience store, supermarket, medical center, light manufacturing, artists, live, work. So again, in the mandatory mixed-use zoning district, one or more of those uses, non-residential uses, is required on the ground floor. In the other zoning districts, so I just want to be clear, only the non-residential uses allowed in the underlying zoning districts are allowed. So that whole list is not necessarily allowed in the other 4 districts for mixed use. You would have to look at the underlying zoning and determine whether it's allowed. Dimensional requirements, given them here, I'm not going to read through them. They're here in a table under dimensional requirements. You can see the density, you can see the maximum height, coverage, minimum usable open space, the setbacks, lot area. We tried when we were developing this to use a lot of the same dimensional controls as the underlying zoning districts. So what that means is, for example, in the Malden Center zoning district, under this new zoning, the lot area minimum of 5,000 square feet and there are no setbacks. Under existing CBD zoning, the minimum lot area is 5,000 and there are no required setbacks. Same thing when you look at the height. maximum in central business is 7 stories, and here in the Malden Center subdistrict, it is also 7 stories. Just giving you that as an example, you can look at the others. The high-rise is set at 10 stories. The Oak Grove district, subdistrict, the height is 3 stories. Under the medium-density district, it is 4 stories, and under the mandatory mixed use, it is back to 7 stories. Again, because that's largely in the central business zoning district, so wanted to note that. In terms of the parking requirements, I'm giving you the breakdown. It's essentially 1 space per dwelling unit for all the subdistricts except the medium-density subdistrict, which is 2 spaces per dwelling unit. In the mandatory mixed-use district, it's 1 space per dwelling unit. None is required for the non-residential use. This proposed zoning does include several provisions that were recommended by the state. So they issued, as part of its guidelines, a sample zoning ordinance. So we did include some provisions that we thought would be useful and relevant to Malden. One is this shared parking provision. So for mixed-use developments, the site plan review committee can consider whether shared parking would be a reasonable option. They do have to submit data in support of that. It's not automatic that it's going to be allowed, but it would be an option. So I wanted to note that specifically. Just want to let you know. So it basically says shared parking may be allowed. It may be adjusted through the site plan review process if the developer can demonstrate that shared spaces will meet parking demands using accepted methodologies. So that is something that's included in both the multifamily overlay and the mandatory mixed-use overlay. Development standards. There are numerous proposed development standards. They'd be applicable to development in both overlay districts. For the details, you can see section 3 of the city council paper. I won't go through all of them, but they're there for your reference. Site plan review regulations, again, they'll be applicable to development in both overlay zoning districts. They are similar to site plan review regulations in our current zoning ordinance for some of the other site plan review districts. Some of the other districts that allow site plan review, such as submission criteria, site plan review committee, review schedule, notice, and expiration. Again, for details, you can see section 4 of the paper. And then finally, affordability requirements, which we've already spoken to briefly. They will be applicable in both the overlay zoning districts and require that 15% of all units in projects with 8 or more units must be affordable housing units. The provisions in this proposed zoning also include most other inclusionary zoning requirements. For details, you could see section 5 of the city council paper. Definitions, this is important to note. There are some new definitions we are required to add so that we can define what some of these terms mean. One is as of right or by right. It will be defined in our ordinance to mean approval without the need or requirement for special permit, variance, zoning amendment, waiver, or other discretionary zoning approval. This is expressly defined to exclude site plan review where required by this ordinance. So that means site plan review will be required. None of those other types of zoning relief would be required if it is considered by right. Mixed-use development is defined to be a development containing a mix of residential uses and non-residential uses, including commercial, institutional, industrial, or other uses. This definition expressly applies only to development of property in the MBTA Communities Multi-Family Overlay District or the mandatory mixed-use overlay district. And then finally, multifamily housing. And this is the state definition. A building with 3 or more residential dwelling units or 2 or more buildings on the same lot with more than 1 residential dwelling unit in each building. This definition expressly applies only to development of property located in the MBTA's Community Multifamily Overlay District or the Mandatory Mixed-Use Overlay District. We do define multifamily dwellings as 5 units or more. That definition will stand in our zoning ordinance. It will not apply to these subdistricts. this definition would apply to the subdistricts. The state, as I said, defines multifamily housing to be 3 or more units. So that's why we've changed, or we're recommending adding that. For current zoning, in terms of the zoning district, you can look at the attached charts that are included in the recommendation. I've given you the property address, the assessor's parcel ID, the proposed subdistrict. Then also there's a column, existing use and current zoning district. So you can see what there were a total of 96 parcels, and you can see what each of those parcels is currently used for, what the current zoning is, and what the proposed new overlay zoning district classification would be. And there is one 2-page chart that applies to all the multifamily overlay, and then there is a single page that is specific to the mandatory mixed-use zoning district. Use regulations will refer back to the current ordinance. If anybody has any questions, I can answer those. Same thing for dimensional controls, parking requirements. Underlying zoning, the use regulations, dimensional controls, parking requirements, and all of the provisions governing the respective underlying zoning districts shall remain in full force, except for uses allowed as of right or identified in the MCMOD and MMUD. So, do you want me to continue on? Yes, please. Chair, so in terms of application and exemptions, the amendments will apply to new construction and new use and occupancy of existing buildings unless exempt by state law or local ordinance, the express language of the amendment, or is the subject of a building permit or special permit issued before the first publication of notice of the public hearing on the amendments, which was November 17, 2023. There is one outstanding special permit. It is for the property at 11 Charles Street. That was granted on June 14, 2023, and that is for multifamily dwelling with 51 units, offices, restaurant, and retail. Per statute, applications for permits at the processing stage when publication occurs are not protected, but historically the city interprets, in consideration of petitioner's good faith reliance on current regs, that the proposed amendments would not apply to applications filed prior to the first date of publication. There are no pending applications filed prior to this date. The effective date will be the City Council's vote to ordain the amendment. The council must act within 90 days of the public hearing close, which would be March 4th, 2024, if the hearing closes tonight. Otherwise, a new public hearing would need to be held. That being said, the state has set a December 31st, 2023 deadline, which we discussed before. So the city must enact zoning that complies with the state law by that deadline. Not only enact it, but file the district compliance application electronically by that date. The standard of review, the planning board's review and recommendation of the proposed zoning changes should be directed by substantive planning objectives, community need, and general welfare. Malden's current zoning laws do not comply with the state law, this new state law. So the proposed amendments are intended to comply with the requirements of the state law. The impacts of noncompliance, Malden may face certain economic impacts for failure to amend its zoning to comply with this new state law. Deborah Burke has already discussed those in ineligibility for funding from various state grant sources, and also we possibly might face legal action by the state. I've attached the Attorney General's advisory concerning enforcement of MBTA's community zoning law that was issued in March 2023 for your reference. In terms of the impacts of compliance, as we've heard, the estimated maximum potential growth is 2,265 units. Again, that's based on the state model that was designed to determine compliance. The chart that's included in the staff report includes some more information than what was shown as part of the map. So you are seeing the unit capacity for each of these sub-districts and the mandatory mixed-use district. You can see that totals up to our unit capacity required by the state, 6,930. I've also given you the existing units. So this is what's actually on those 96 properties. How many units are already there? Then the maximum potential growth number, which, as the consultant explained, is not necessarily the unit capacity minus the existing units. And as they explained, that is based on the fact that the potential growth is calculated based on each parcel. I want to give you just a little bit more information on that. Each parcel has its own existing conditions. So there's a building, there are lot setbacks, there are density, parcels in the same districts were likely developed under different zoning regs. So now we're about to apply zoning over a whole group of parcels that were developed under different regs. So it's not just it's not an easy exercise, just as the consultant said, just to subtract. So I want to give you an example, if I could, Mr. Chair, just to help you follow. So if there is a building with no existing units, and under the new zoning, units are allowed, that gives you 100% potential growth. So there are no units now, under the new zoning, there could be units. However, there could be a parcel in the city, let's call it parcel A, that has 100 existing units, but the new zoning allows the same exact number. For example, at the Overlook Ridge, the same number of units could be built on those parcels. So there's no potential growth on those parcels. However, you could take parcel B, which has a building with 100 existing units. New zoning could allow fewer units, so there would be no potential growth. It is possible there are a couple of these parcels where the new zoning doesn't allow what's actually still in existence, what's in existence today. And that's just the way the numbers work out. It's based on the building size, the lot size, the setbacks, et cetera. And then you could possibly have the third parcel, parcel C, with a 100-unit building, and the new zoning could allow more units than what's there. So that's how you'd get the potential growth number there. So that's an easier way, hopefully, to help you understand why that new growth is not necessarily unit capacity minus existing units. So the potential growth number that's how that's derived. I've also given you here the info, the number of parcels. How many parcels are in this new proposed Malden Center overlay district? How many are in the Malden Center high-rise, Oak Grove, medium density, mandatory mixed? Also giving you the acreage here. In terms of the impacts, the consultant walked you through that. I won't go through that again. We've spoken about the potential growth being lower expected based on the likelihood of change. And then, as Deborah Burke spoke about in the mayor's letter, also referenced, there will be a comprehensive follow-up planning process. The city will consider additional zoning amendments during a zoning modernization and master planning process that was recently initiated by the City Council. That was through City Council Paper 352-2023. This board obviously will be involved as the board authorized to do the master planning by state law, so we will be involved, you will be involved in the master planning process. You will also be involved in any zoning amendments as you are here tonight looking at zoning amendments. So you're going to be involved, and you're required to be involved in both of those processes. Those processes will be done without the pending state deadline. So they'll be done, more thoughtfully and deliberately, will involve more community engagement and some different processes that we were not able to necessarily use given the time constraints we had to comply with the state deadlines. So that's it. The recommendation, do you want me to move forward with that?
Please.
So the recommendation, which is made part of the public hearing, now this is a recommendation I'm making to you. If you choose to, you will make this as an advisory recommendation or another recommendation to the City Council. City Council will receive your advisory recommendation and either follow it or not. Then they will move forward and decide whether to amend the zoning or not. So again, this is an advisory recommendation, a recommendation for an advisory recommendation, excuse me. So the recommendation is that the Planning Board recommend to the City Council approval of the proposed amendments of Section 12.08.010, which is the establishment of districts, and Section 12.08.020, the zoning map. 2, approval of the amendments of Section 12.12, the use regulations as proposed, and with the following clarifying language, which is underlined. The first is Section 1.C.2a, permitted uses in the MCMOD. Only those non-residential uses allowed in the underlying zoning district are allowed, and all non-residential uses shall be subject to the use regulations of the underlying zoning district. I'm recommending that so that it's very clear that you were not intending to remove any existing use regulations. So for example, if a convenience store requires a special permit, it's still going to require a special permit. And that, again, is specific to the multifamily overlay, not to the mandatory mixed use. In the mandatory mixed use zoning district, the convenience store would be allowed by right. This is only for those parcels that are in the multifamily housing. And specifically, I can give you some examples, but these are specifically designed, this provision is specifically intended to address, there are certain parcels, for example, on Summer Street, that are in a residential neighborhood where mixed use would not be allowed. It's only residential. So we want to make sure we're still preserving and protecting what's already there. Section 4, the second part of it is Section 4D1B, Site Plan Review Committee. This is more a typo, but it didn't read correctly. So of the 7 members, a city councilor at large designated by president of the city council or designee. So the word by was missing. And then 3, approval of the proposed amendments to Section 12.32.060B, the definitions. And then 4, prepare a legal description of all property land that is a subject to the amendment, include with any amendment ordained.
Okay, thank you very much, Michelle, for providing that. Does anyone have any questions for Michelle on either the planning board or on the ordinance committee? Ken Antonucci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Michelle, so the potential growth is essentially about 50% of the max growth. Does that mean the other numbers listed above would also be reduced by 50%? Or would that be the expectation?
Okay, so say that again. So the potential growth.
If the potential growth is approximately 50% of the max growth, those numbers up above.
Well, the max growth is the potential growth. So what are you asking? The maximum potential growth
was the 2,265 units. But you're saying the potential growth is more, is essentially 1140.
The likelihood, right.
The likelihood.
Right, I'm
So
sorry,
would
the
that-
likelihood potential growth is less.
Yeah, so would that mean those numbers listed from, 1 to 9 above would also be expected to be 50% of what's listed there?
I don't know if it would be 50, but the impacts would definitely be less. The impacts, if there were fewer, the 1 through 9 is based on 2,265 units.
So
If
maybe
there
not
were
50%,
less,
but it
yes, I
would
would
be
say it
expected
would
to
be
be
less,
reduced.
right. It may not be exactly 50% because it will depend on, which properties are getting developed and which aren't. So, it might be, I wouldn't say it would be 50%, but it would definitely have an impact on the impacts.
Okay, thank you.
Vacant, who is that?
Council Spatafora has joined as a panelist.
Okay, I'm not sure who vacant is. That's Councilor Winslow.
Yeah, I just had a question for Sarah Nels about the annual, the school enrollment and the municipal contribution for school funding. So if you could come up and just answer that question. So this is impact number 7 and impact number 9. So I just want to understand how that works. So
Yes, and if you could speak up when you're speaking. Thank you.
So impact number 9 talks about the municipal contribution for school funding. Malden's contribution would be, this is based on the max, but potential growth would be 5.5 million. Now, is that because of the 46 additional students? Is that just how that works? Or I'm just trying to, what's causing that $5.5 million increase? Is it just the state formula or what?
Sure. So the Chapter 70 funding requirement or municipal contribution requirement is based, the target number is based on total Malden resident income and total property value. Those are the two inputs to come up with the target. The actual minimum contribution is lower and informed by a bunch of other stuff. But it's not directly tied to enrollment. It's tied to additional property value and additional income associated with the potential units.
So, we would be required by Chapter 70, which is the state education law, to put in an extra $5.5 million, as a minimum if this all would happen. And supposedly we could still use that to educate those 46 additional students or whatever, so we could do that. And then number 8, so the expected property tax revenue is in excess of what we would expect our Chapter 70 contribution. So, and this is showing that this development should have a possible net positive tax increase, though we would want to provide additional services and stuff like that, so.
That's
yeah.
right, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I may be helpful to have maybe an estimate from the mayor's office in terms of if we have the additional police and fire staff to know kind of generally what that might cost. I think, my rough number, it seems like that still would be below that, all that $8.28 million. So we'll either come out a little ahead or at least even in that way. So, all right, thank you very much. Thanks for that clarification.
Councilor Winslow, I had done some of those just back of the envelope estimates, and the 8.3 million that we would get in additional tax revenue would be offset, if these numbers are right, by the 5.5 million. And then if we're adding 8.5 fire and police, that would be another roughly 2.2 million. Right, so that would bring up to 7.7 of the 8.3. And then that's before we find out if we have to pay for the education costs of 46 additional people. So I look at that $8 million as a wash with the costs that it's going to take to address some of these needs. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's just sort of just doing some estimates of what the ultimate contribution might be from this. And I don't see a lot of contribution. Does Councilor Spatafora have anything? Is he looking to?
He's on as a panelist. I'm not sure if he can hear us or he hasn't. He could unmute himself if he wanted. I can ask him to unmute.
Okay. No, I just want to make sure we're not missing him if he's looking to weigh in. Does anyone else have any other questions for Michelle or the consultants? Or I know Councilor Winslow had participated significantly along with Councilor Spatafora. Eric Henry. Whoops, wait a second, I just bumped you. There you go, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know who prepared the executive summary with regards to the survey, but can somebody speak to that? I could, going through the executive summary, I could gather, it seems that there were 11 questions on the survey thereabouts, and it seems that 6 or 7 of them were directly answered by the graphs and in the notes of the summary itself, but I couldn't glean some answers for, like, for example, for question 11, how do you typically get around Malden? Is there anybody here who can actually speak to that?
Yes, I actually do have, and we just received the final report today. I have the final report. It was just posted online. I didn't want to overwhelm, so I figured we would give you the executive summary, and I can, if you give me a minute, I can find that.
Oh, yeah, take 2.
Which question would you?
Well, it was, well, it's just, we cut to the question 8. do you support changing the minimum lot size to allow for similar housing? If so, where?
Okay. Do you support lowering the lot requirement? So, 53% do not support it. 13% supported only near transit, and 34% supported it. Is that what you're asking? Then I also have the breakdown by age, ward, whether you own or rent. So there's a couple sub breakdowns as well I have for each question.
Okay.
But that's the main, so the lowering the lot size requirement, it was 53% do not support. That was the question, right?
That was, yes, I do believe that was,
Let me just get to 8. You said it was question 8?
yeah.
Okay, right.
The other one I couldn't glean, one or two, is, do you support lowering the Malden off-street parking requirements for multifamily housing? Seven, I'm sorry, yes, thank you.
Okay, going backwards. 50% do not support, 16%, this is of respondents, support only near transit, and 34% supported in general.
Okay. Question number 9, do you support lowering the minimum density requirements, square feet of lot area per unit for multifamily housing?
53% do not support it, 13% supported it, support lowering the density requirement only near transit, and 34% support in general.
And the last one I had, Michelle, and thank you for this, was the number 11. It said, how do you typically get around Malden?
Let me see. I do have that, hold on. I'm just looking on the website, because I literally just posted this today when we, and I'm not seeing that question. Yeah, I'm not sure if the consultants are here, if they can provide that. I don't actually see that. Unless that.
Okay. Okay. Just for the record again, where are you, where online is that, Michelle?
Okay, on the city website, on the front page, under, just shut it down, that we have an MBTA webpage.
Okay.
That we set up, so it's under community, what the heck's happening here? It's under, so under government, community forums and committees, there's an MBTA Communities Zoning Law webpage. It has all the presentations to the council, all the updates you received, the law, the survey results, the survey itself, the zoning proposal, has all the info. So under government, community forums and committees, it's the last entry, MBTA Community Zoning Law.
Okay.
But apparently it is not, it is missing that, but the consultant is here. And maybe they can,
Do you guys have that information that you could share with us? Thank you.
Sure. The question was a select all that apply option as presented in the survey. And of the 1,529 responses we received, 1,280 said they get around by car or truck, at least partially. 544 said they get around by subway or rapid transit. 250 said they get around by bicycle. 767 said that they get around walking or rolling. 103 said they get around using the commuter rail, and 321 said they get around using the bus.
Okay, thank you very much. While I have you there, just a point of clarification. We're discussing bringing all of these housing units online, and the impact to our schools is a net increase of less than 50 students. Did I misunderstand that?
This was based on the historic pattern of, since looking back at changes in enrollment and the number of housing units permitted in Malden since 2007, that's just as far back as we had the data. We looked at the relationship. I think in that time there were roughly 2,800 units permitted, and the number of students enrolled in Malden, the total enrollment only increased by about 50 in that time. So based on that metric, yes, the number is 40-something.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield.
Thank you, Eric. And Antonucci.
Sure.
Yeah, actually, just going back to that number, that 50. So that's, I just want to make sure I understand that. Of all those developments, and you look at data back to, when did you say 2007? Only accounted for an increase of 50 students? And that's citywide?
Yes, if you look at
in all the public schools?
If you look at the difference in enrollment in 2007, total enrollment in 2007, total enrollment in 2022, I think 2022, the difference is close to 50, yep.
And forgive me if you said this, but
Sure.
Where did that data come from? Is that from?
That's from the city, from Malden Public Schools and charter schools. And the permit data is from the planning department.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions for the consultants? No? Thank you very much, Ms.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Michelle? Anyone from the City Council? Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Seega.
I just wanted to throw my 2 cents in about the school-age children in these apartments. Believe it or not, they're probably pretty accurate, because after dealing with the development at Overlook Ridge, all those units only gave us like 20 kids, which you would have thought would have been a drastic increase, and it really wasn't. Over the past few years, I think it's gotten a little bit more, but with that many units at that development, we only got a couple dozen kids. So I think the people that are moving into these particular units are going to work in Boston, and they're not necessarily starting families here. So it is not an uncommon thing. So they probably are pretty spot on with that number. So thanks.
Okay, I'm sorry, Diane Chuha.
Yeah, I had a question for Michelle, if you can answer it. So based on the list that I read, if someone owns a piece of property there, because most of them you said are occupied, there's gas station, or not a gas station, but there's let's say retail sales with a drive-through. And if someone wanted to buy that piece of property, because that's in the overlay district, they can pretty much put up anything based on the current ordinances, the new ordinances that we're developing. So all of these, like, of these properties are currently owned. They're not just all city-owned properties. These are privately owned properties that we're talking about. So if someone wants to sell their home, they might not know about it if they have if they're in the overlay district. Have they been notified that they're all in this now overlay district?
Yes, so a couple responses. So, yes, I've indicated where it's city-owned. So it says, for example, I call it municipal. So if it says municipal parking garage or city park, that means it's city-owned. The rest are privately owned. So that's the first part of your question. The 96 properties on this list were notified, as were 1,800 other abutters. So all the properties within 500 feet of all these 96 properties were notified. They received a notice of this hearing. So your question, though, or your comment about somebody owns a home, as you can see from this list, there is, I believe, one four-family, and that's it. That's there's a single four-family house that is part of the proposed multifamily zoning district. The rest are either multifamily, business, city-owned, or vacant.
Could they tear down that four-family and build a monstrosity?
I don't believe they could build a, quote, monstrosity. They would have to comply with the new zoning.
Okay.
So, for example, that is it's in the Residence A zoning district, that particular house. It sits between two multifamily, existing larger multifamily. They would need to comply with the new regs. So the new regs do have, dimensional standards. In order to build, they would need to have minimum lot size, certain setbacks, provide open space, provide parking. So each property would have to look at its own boundaries, come up with a development plan. Running through the state model, it does show, that's how we got that potential growth number to tell you. It does show units could be created, but it also shows where units can't be created or where less than the existing units could go back. If, for example, the building were destroyed or demolished, they maybe couldn't put back the exact same number of units. So it's on a parcel-by-parcel basis.
Okay.
They would have to look, look into it and see. But I would say not all the 96 parcels have potential growth for different reasons. Some because they're city-owned, so they're exempt. This wouldn't apply to them. We need to go through a special exemption process to get publicly owned land designated as developable. So even though it's shown on the map, it doesn't mean they could build on the city park, or we could build on the city park. So each property, you'd have to look at individually to see if units could be added or not. Some, it's a little easier to say, for example, when you look at the Malden Center high-rise, I can tell you there are only 4 parcels in that district. Mm-hmm. So we can see which 4 there are. We can see how many existing units, and we can see the growth is only 18 units. We'd have to get into the more specifics to see which of those 4 could build. Maybe it's not all could build 18, maybe it's 6 here, 4 there, and 12 on the other, so.
Okay, all right, thank you.
But everybody was definitely notified, all the 96 and all the abutters within 500 feet to the 96.
You all set, Diane?
Yes, I am, thank you.
Ken Antonucci.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm not sure who would actually answer this question, or I just want a clarification. So, assuming these changes went through, and out of this list of 9 impacts, with the increased tax revenue, but the costs associated with that end up as a net zero, so basically a wash, like we talked about earlier. There's still the argument to do this, just on the economic portion of it, is that there's still a net benefit to the city because of the access to the state funding. So I just wanted to make sure I understood that properly. So even if the costs are net zero of all these impacts, there's still going to be an economic benefit to the city to be able to continue to access and be eligible for these potential state grants.
Right,
Is that
and
right?
that's what the state's done. Unfortunately, they're strong-arming the city and holding us hostage with these other grants
Right.
and awards.
And that's the carrot.
But I wouldn't say that, I'd separate that from the impact that we were given, because you also have to figure in on the, whether it's better for the city with those additional 2,300 units in the traffic.
Right, that's
and
why
the
I was-
rest of it.
yeah.
But, so I'm not sure where you're going with it,
Well,
but,
that's why I was just thinking strictly the money-wise, there's that benefit. But then you mentioned the other impacts, there's the traffic.
Right, but-
And, that's why I was just trying to focus it just on the financial aspect of it.
Yeah.
It seems like there's still a benefit to the city. The traffic is a whole nother issue, another can of worms. And then you mentioned, obviously, the accessibility, the increased number of units to help solve the housing problem and the affordable housing. So, there are other benefits and impacts besides just financial, but I was just trying to get it in my head, the financial aspect.
right, there's a portfolio of grants that we have access to that have really helped the city. We're a community that relies on that state aid. So that definitely needs to be taken into account, even though some of the impacts that were listed in Michelle's report might net out. Those other things definitely contribute to us. Again, the state's forcing it on us, which is unfortunate. Our Beacon Hill contingent supported it, knowing the burdens that would be susceptible to Malden, but there are a lot of other grants that that we benefit from that help offset some of the more demanding impacts.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Does anyone else have any comments? No other comments? Anything from the city council? Mr. Councilor Spatafora, is he able to weigh in or not?
He's on as and I believe I fixed the issue. I'm sorry, that was a technical issue. Everything was on mute, including this room, so I'm sorry about that. That's my mistake.
Okay.
But he's welcome to speak, but he's allowed to speak.
And no one else has raised their hand?
No.
Requesting?
No.
Okay, the only other thing I'd like to say is I applaud the team's efforts.
Oh, somebody is raising their hand when you finish, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
I'd like to applaud the team's efforts to generate the best option in the interest of the city and to achieve compliance by the deadline that's quickly approaching. We get a short runway here. We do want to be compliant to be eligible for the other aid that Director Burke mentioned in the mayor's letter. The mayor cited, Michelle has referenced it. That's a lot of real contribution to the city that we don't want to have that cut off from us if we can help it. Michelle?
Yes, so I do want to note the hearing is closed, but one of the attendees is raising their hand. So do you want me to allow them to talk?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Shirley Z. Being allowed to talk, but you're on mute, so can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
So you should give your name and address for the
Name and
record.
address for the record, please.
Sure, yeah. My name is Shirley Xie, and my address is 24 Alpine Street in Malden. And my husband and I have been in Malden for like almost 20 years. So my question is when I saw this draft map for the zoning change, my question is, because the purpose for MBTA is the zoning gonna be more accessible to the T station via public transportation. So encourage the people to use the public transportation, okay? So in my understanding, the area neighboring the public transportation, it should be considered like in a higher priority. But when I saw this draft map, I saw those parcel, actually, some parcel actually is kind of far away from the public transportation. Because I read through the regulation, it should be like within the half mile within the public transportation. So I didn't see the parcel right next to the Oak Grove, the Malden Center, that area included in this zoning map, the proposal zoning map. For example, like Washington Street, they're right next to T station, like the, let me check the map, okay, the, like some area in the Glenwood, some area in the Greenheart Street, Clifton Street, Lincoln Street, they are right next to the T-track. They are more accessible to the public transportation. Why they're not considered in this draft map, that's my confusion. Also, I talked to my neighbor, they have the same concern. The second question, have you ever considered within the half mile of the public transportation required by the MBTA? Have you put out a list? Is there any vacant building there? So we can reconsider to put them as a higher priority, because city doesn't want those vacant buildings keep as vacant, right? There's no value there. If they could consider in this no new zoning area, they probably can do something. So that's my second questions, yeah. So another thing is about the survey report. I also just read the report result. It's only show the number, but I know when we fill out the survey report, they also have the open questions. So have you get any valuable feedback from the survey report instead just the number? I think my neighbors, they told me like, okay, we also voice our concern and questions in those open questions, okay? So, but I didn't see any the open question, opinion, the input show in the survey report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you speak to any of Ms. Z's questions?
Yes, well, let's start first with the survey. We did post the survey results that we received. We're going to update those because that did not include question 11 apparently, and it also did not include, I guess, what you'd call the raw data, the open responses. So we will be compiling that and posting that as well. So that will be done. In terms of areas within the transit, what they call the transit area, 70% of the units in our unit capacity under the zoning are within a half mile. So we certainly, the group did certainly prioritize locations that were within the half mile of transit area. So again, 70% of that 6930 is in that area. Really, the only area that isn't is the medium density. I will note, though, that the state law allows us to have 50% of our district and number, so 50% of the acreage and 50% of the number of units outside the half mile radius. For our proposal, 2,087 are outside the half mile radius, 48, 43 are within the half mile radius. That's where I came up with the 70%. So 70% is within the half mile radius.
Okay, thank you.
We did do that. So I think that's everything. Was there something I missed?
No, I think that's it. Okay, is there anyone else that has a question for Michelle? That's on the planning board or the committee? Okay, Without that, is there a motion? Ken Antonucci.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the recommendations by the planner and forward those recommendations to the city council.
Michelle, is that specific enough for you to be able to write up?
Yeah, so you are making the same recommendation. Is that what your motion is
Yes,
to?
so my motion
Okay.
again is to approve the planner's recommendations and forward those recommendations to the city council.
Okay, so to make that same recommendation?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Okay, is there a second? Eric McCush.
I'll second that recommendation.
Okay. Give me a second here.
And this is the recommendation that's in the planning staff report dated December 5th, 2023?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
just for the record, okay? You all set?
Do three and then take a break.
So a yes vote will be to make the recommendation to the city council. Ken Antonucci?
Yes.
Diane Chuha?
Yes.
Tawadich Gebrselassie?
Yes.
Okay.
Risa Gray? Yes. Patrick Hayes?
Yes.
Eric Henry?
Yes.
Eric McCush?
Yes.
Ronnie Raj Verma?
Yes.
Chuck Iovan?
Yes. Motion passes 9-0. We will make planning board will make a recommendation to the city council to accept the paper as submitted.
With the modifications that were recommended, with the additional
Yes.
language, yes, okay.
Now I will pass it over to Councilor Crowe, and she can conduct her business.
On Councilor Winslow's motion to adjourn, second by Councilor Linehan, sorry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We stand adjourned.
Thank you very much, councilors. Thank you to everyone who came out. Yes, thank you.
Everybody have a good holiday?
Yes, well, we'll be back next week, so you're welcome to come back. Same bat time, same bat channel. I think people recognize it's a done deal, so people didn't come over. Okay, let's see what the next order of business is. So that was. Yeah.
He's being able to buy a house?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because those are so, it's like the new units down here, the new units there, they're more professional.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Oh, is that never?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Thank you very much, Counselor. Have a nice holiday. Yeah, we're still going, but there are side conversations. So, we only have to adjourn, right? The next meeting for the planning board, the next meeting will be next Wednesday evening, December 13th at 7 p.m. So thank you very much. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Diane Chuha. Is there a second? Tawadich Gebrselassie, yes. And that is at 8:49. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much.